The rain came down in sheets, pounding against the windshield of Claire's car as she navigated the narrow, winding road. The wipers struggled to keep up, their rhythmic squeak barely cutting through the downpour. She squinted through the glass, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. The GPS had stopped working miles ago, and the map she'd scribbled on a napkin was now a soggy mess on the passenger seat. All she knew was that she was somewhere in the backwoods of Vermont, and the house she was looking for was close. It had to be. Claire hadn't planned on coming here, not like this. But when the letter arrived 2 weeks ago, she couldn't ignore it. The handwriting was unmistakable, her father's, though she hadn't seen or heard from him in over a decade. The note was brief, cryptic. If you want the truth, come to Hollow Hill. The house will tell you everything. She'd almost thrown it away. Her father had walked out on her and her mother when Claire was just a kid, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions and a lifetime of resentment. But curiosity, or maybe something darker, had gnawed at her. And now, here she was, driving through a storm to a place she wasn't even sure existed. The road narrowed further, the trees pressing in on either side like sentinels. Claire's headlights caught a rusted mailbox, leaning precariously at the edge of the road. She slowed the car, peering through the rain. The name on the mailbox was faded, but she could just make it out. Hollow. Her heart skipped a beat. She turned onto the overgrown driveway, the car lurching over potholes and fallen branches. The trees thinned, and suddenly, the house loomed into view. It was a massive, crumbling Victorian, its once grand facade now sagging under the weight of neglect. The windows were dark, the paint peeling, and the roof missing shingles. A wrought iron gate hung open, creaking in the wind. Claire parked the car and sat for a moment, staring at the house. It looked like something out of a nightmare. She grabbed her flashlight and stepped out into the rain, the cold biting through her jacket. The front door was slightly ajar, the wood splintered and warped. She pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest. The air inside was thick with dust and the smell of mildew. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a foyer with a grand staircase, its banister coated in cobwebs. "Hello," she called, her voice echoing through the empty halls. There was no answer. Claire stepped inside, her boots crunching on broken glass. The house was eerily silent, save for the sound of the rain tapping against the windows. She moved cautiously, her flashlight darting across the walls. The house was frozen in time, furniture covered in sheets, family portraits still hanging, their faces obscured by layers of grime. She found the study at the end of the hall. The door was closed, but a faint light seeped through the crack at the bottom. Claire hesitated, then pushed the door open. The room was unlike the rest of the house. It was clean, almost pristine. A single lamp glowed on the desk, casting long shadows across the walls. The shelves were lined with books, their spines cracked and faded. And in the center of the room, sitting in a high-backed chair, was a man. Claire's breath caught in her throat. It was her father. He looked older than she remembered, his hair grey and thinning, his face lined with age. But it was him. He sat perfectly still, his hands resting on the arms of the chair, his eyes fixed on her. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. He didn't respond. Claire took a step closer, her flashlight shaking in her hand. That's when she noticed the blood. It pooled beneath the chair, dark and sticky, spreading across the floor. She stumbled back, her mind racing. This wasn't possible. He couldn't be here. He couldn't be dead. And yet, there he was. A noise behind her made her spin around. The door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the house. Claire's heart pounded as she rushed to the door, yanking on the handle. It wouldn't budge. She was trapped. The lamp on the desk flickered, then went out, plunging the room into darkness. Claire's flashlight died a moment later, leaving her in complete blackness. She fumbled with the switch, but it was no use. The batteries were dead. And then she heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like footsteps. They were coming from the hallway, slow and deliberate, growing louder with each step. Claire pressed her back against the door, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The footsteps stopped just outside the room. The doorknob began to turn. Claire's mind raced. She scanned the room for something, anything, to defend herself. Her eyes landed on the fireplace, where an iron poker leaned against the hearth. She lunged for it, her fingers closing around the cold metal just as the door creaked open. The figure in the doorway was tall, its features obscured by shadow. Claire raised the poker, her hands shaking. "Stay back," she shouted, her voice cracking. The figure stepped into the room, and the lamp on the desk flickered back to life. Claire's breath caught in her throat. It was her father, again. But this time, he was different. His face was twisted into a grotesque smile, his eyes hollow and lifeless. Blood dripped from his mouth, staining his shirt. He took a step toward her, his movements jerky and unnatural. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice a guttural rasp. Claire swung the poker, but it passed right through him, as if he were made of smoke. He laughed, a sound that sent chills down her spine. She backed away, her mind struggling to make sense of what she was seeing. "What are you?" she whispered. "I'm what you made me," he said, his smile widening. "I'm your guilt, your regret, your fear." Claire's back hit the wall. There was nowhere left to run. The thing that looked like her father reached for her, its fingers curling like claws. And then a voice cut through the darkness. "Claire." She turned her head, her vision blurring. The room was gone. She was lying on the floor of the foyer, her flashlight beside her. The front door was wide open, the rain pouring in. A man stood over her, his face etched with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, helping her to her feet. Claire blinked, disoriented. Who are you?" "I'm Jack. I live down the road. I saw your car and thought I'd check on you. This place, it's not safe." Claire looked around, her heart still racing. The house was just as she'd found it, dark, empty, and crumbling. There was no study, no lamp, no blood, and no sign of her father. I thought I saw something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack nodded grimly. "This house has a way of playing tricks on people. Come on, let's get you out of here." Claire followed him to the door, her legs unsteady. As they stepped outside, she glanced back at the house. For a moment, she thought she saw a figure standing in the window, watching her. But when she blinked, it was gone.